He was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked in, holding my acceptance letter from the Culinary Institute, like it was a piece of evidence in a crime. Not reading it, just holding it. Waiting. My father has this way of being still that feels louder than anything he could ever say out loud. He's been a cardiologist for 31 years. He learned a long time ago that silence does more damage than words. I grew up knowing exactly what that stillness meant. Sit down, he said. I didn't sit down. He placed the letter on the counter between us, smoothed it flat with one hand, and looked at me the way he looks at a patient whose chart he's already decided he doesn't like. You deferred your law school application, he said. It wasn't a question. I did, without telling us. I'm 26, Dad. He looked at my mother then, standing by the sink with her arms crossed like she'd known this conversation was coming for months, and had been rehearsing her part. Maybe she had. Our house ran like that. Decisions made in rooms I wasn't invited into. Announcements delivered at the kitchen table like verdicts. You cannot be serious about this cooking thing, my mother said. The word cooking came out of her mouth like she'd bitten into something rotten. It's not a cooking thing. It's a culinary arts program. The best one in the country. You have a commerce degree, my father said. I know what degree I have. I was there. That's when things shifted. I could feel it. The temperature in the room. Something tightening. My father picked up the letter again and I watched his jaw set. We did not spend 20 years building this family's name so you could go make soup, he said. And there it was. The family's name. That was always what it came back to, not me. Not what I wanted. The name. His name. I'd heard some version of that sentence my entire life. At the dinner table when I said I wanted to take an art elective in high school. When I told them I'd been writing restaurant reviews for the campus paper. When I graduated and told them I was thinking about food media instead of articling. Every time, the same redirect. What people would think, what the family represented, what was expected. I was expected to be useful in a way they could brag about. I've already accepted the offer, I said. I start in September. My mother made a sound I'd never heard from her before. My father set the letter down very carefully. Then you're making a choice, he said. And choices have consequences. I know. If you walk away from law school, for this, you walk away from this family. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I stood there and I thought about all the times I'd backed down. All the times I'd said yes when I meant no, or stayed quiet when I had something real to say. Or let them redirect me because it was easier than the alternative. I thought about the restaurant I'd found on a rainy Tuesday in Kensington Market. A tiny place with 12 seats and a chef who'd trained in Lyon. And how I'd sat at the counter for 3 hours just watching her work and felt something open up in my chest that I didn't have a word for. I thought about how I'd never once felt that watching a property law lecture. I understand, I said. Get out, my father said, and don't come back until you've come to your senses. My mother didn't say anything. That was her answer. I went upstairs, packed 2 bags. The kind you pack when you don't know how long you're leaving for. And I walked out the front door of the house I'd grown up in on a Wednesday afternoon in March, while my father was already back on his phone, and my mother was rinsing dishes like nothing had happened. I sat in my car in their driveway for about 4 minutes. Then I drove away. What they didn't know. What I had never told them. Not because I was hiding it exactly, but because I knew what would happen if I did. Was that 8 months earlier, I had sold my food blog. Not a blog in the way people picture. I'd started it 6 years before, in my second year of university, because I needed somewhere to put all the things I was thinking about food and couldn't say to anyone in my actual life. It started as recipe testing, then became something else. Long essays about the politics of bread. A series on immigrant-owned restaurants in mid-sized Canadian cities that somehow went viral twice. A column about what we lose when chain restaurants replace neighborhood institutions. It had 340,000 subscribers and a newsletter open rate that media buyers apparently found very interesting. A digital media company out of Toronto had approached me the previous summer. We'd had 11 months of conversations, due diligence, lawyers on both sides. I'd used a portion of a small inheritance from my grandmother to pay for mine, and in July I had signed the papers. The sale had closed at $3.2 million. After capital gains tax after legal fees, I had walked away with just under $2.1 million. I had told no one in my family. Not because I was ashamed. Because I already knew that number would change everything and nothing at the same time. It would make my father feel retroactively justified. See, commerce degree, entrepreneurial thinking, good, and then he would try to take it over, manage it, direct it towards something with his name on it. My mother would start calling her friends. The money would become something that belonged to the family narrative instead of to me. So I kept it quiet. I opened a separate account, found a financial planner recommended by my lawyer, and went on living my life as if nothing had changed. Which, in most of the ways that mattered, nothing had. I was still the daughter who made uncomfortable choices. I just also happened to have a safety net. The culinary program was 16 months. I moved into a small rental in the Plateau Mont Royal in Montreal. The institute was there and I'd always loved the city, and I threw myself into it in a way I hadn't thrown myself into anything since I was a teenager and first started cooking. The first few months were hard in ways I hadn't expected. Not technically hard, emotionally hard. There's something about being in a room full of people who are genuinely passionate about the same thing you are, that makes you realize how long you'd been living without that. I cried on the walk home after my third class. Not because anything bad had happened. Just because something had finally been right. I worked. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in school. I staged at a brasserie in Outremont on weekends for free, just to get the hours. I started testing recipes in my apartment kitchen until 2 in the morning and photographing them in the window light before class. I was building something, but I didn't know yet what shape it would take. I talked to my grandmother every Sunday. She was the only family member I told. She said, "Good. Your father has spent his whole life saving other people's hearts and couldn't manage to hold on to yours. You go do what you need to do." She was 81 and she was the sharpest person I knew. I didn't talk to my parents. They didn't call. That part, I want to be honest, hurt more than I let myself admit at the time. I spent a lot of the first year finding reasons to feel fine about it, telling myself I was better off, that the quiet was actually freedom. And it was, mostly. But there were moments. Holiday weekends when my roommate went home to her family in Quebec City and I walked around Montreal alone and felt the absence of something I couldn't name precisely, just the specific weight of not being wanted the way a person wants to be wanted by their parents. That doesn't go away because you've decided to live your own life. It just coexists with everything else. I let myself feel it. Then I went back to work. By the time I finished the program, I had the outline of a plan. Not a restaurant. Not yet, maybe not ever. Restaurants are a particular kind of brutal and I wanted to understand the business better before I committed to it. What I wanted was a food studio, a test kitchen space, a content production setup, a home base for the kind of editorial and consulting work I'd been doing online for years, but taken seriously, professional, physical. I spent 6 months looking at commercial spaces in Toronto and Montreal. A broker my financial planner connected me with helped me understand what I was actually looking for. I did the numbers 100 times. In the end, I found a heritage building in Ottawa, a former print shop in Hintonburg, exposed brick, north-facing skylights, 2,800 square feet on the ground floor and a small apartment above. It needed significant work. The owners had held it for 30 years and were ready to sell. I bought it for $890,000. With renovation costs and equipment, proper commercial appliances, a photography setup, a small dining area for private events, I spent another $340,000. I had budgeted carefully. The purchase and build-out came to just under $1.25 million, which left me with roughly $850,000 invested, a modest operating fund, and a business plan I'd revised 15 times. I moved into the apartment upstairs in April. By June, the studio was operational. I am telling you these numbers because I know what it's like to read a story like this and wonder where the math went. I wondered that too every time I read about someone who'd made it, without any specifics, so here they are. I didn't spend everything I had on one thing. I was careful. I was probably more careful than I'd ever been about anything, because it was mine and I wasn't going to waste it. My brother called in October. He'd found my studio through a food media piece. Someone had done a short profile on independent culinary studios in the capital region and I was in it, with my name and a photo. I hadn't hidden it. I just hadn't announced it. He texted first. "Hey, saw the article. Looks like things are going well for you." I stared at that message for a long time. My brother and I had not been close as children. He was 4 years older, already absorbed into my father's world, already being groomed for something, already being told he was exceptional. He had done what was expected. Finished his MBA, joined a wealth management firm, married someone my parents approved of, come to every holiday dinner and sat at my father's right hand and agreed with everything my father said. He was not a bad person. But he was my father's person a way I never had been. I wrote back, "Thanks, been a lot of work." He called that evening. We did the small talk. "How are you? How's Ottawa? How's the business?" He asked about the studio in a way that felt like he was building toward something. I let him take his time. Then, "Listen, I wanted to reach out because Dad's been dealing with some stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "The practice. There have been some issues. A billing dispute with the provincial college, some regulatory things I don't fully understand at all. But it's put a strain on things financially. They've had to bring in a lawyer." I waited. "I know things ended badly between you guys. But he's in a tough spot right now and I think he'd be open to talking. If you wanted to reach out." There it was. I had known, from the moment I saw my brother's name on my phone, that this was what the call was about. Not me. Not the 2.5 years of silence. Not any genuine reckoning with how I'd been treated or why I'd left. Something had happened and money had entered the picture and suddenly I was worth locating. "How much?" I said. "What? How much does he need?" Silence on the line. This isn't about, it's okay," I said. "You can be straight with me. I'm not going to be angry. I just want to understand what's actually being asked." My brother was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's looking at maybe $60,000-70,000 to cover the legal costs. He doesn't want to liquidate any of his portfolio right now because of the timing." I thought about that. $60,000 or $70,000. To a cardiologist who had been practicing for 3 decades, who owned a house in Forest Hill worth several times what my studio had cost, whose portfolio was apparently intact enough that liquidating it at the wrong moment was a concern. "He told me to get out," I said, "and not to come back until I'd come to my senses. Do you remember that?" Another silence. "I remember. Has he come to any of his? Any at all?" My brother didn't answer. "I'm not going to do it," I said. "Not because I don't have it, and not because I want him to suffer. but because I'm not going to be the person who disappears for 2.5 years and then shows up as a solution to a problem I had nothing to do with. On terms that were talked to me, he can call me. As my father. Not through you, not about money. As my father. If that call comes, I'll answer it. I heard my brother exhale. I figured, he said. I had to try. I know, I said. That's fine. I hope he gets it sorted out. We hung up and I sat in my apartment above the studio for a while, listening to the street below. It was a Thursday night, Hintonburg in October, the leaves already going, someone walking a dog on the sidewalk, a light on in the cafe across the street. I felt strange, but not the way I'd expected. Not angry. It's not sad exactly. More like I'd passed through a doorway I'd been waiting by for a long time and the other side was just quieter. My mother called 3 weeks later. She didn't mention money. She mentioned that she'd heard from her friend, whose daughter lived in Ottawa, that I had a studio now, and she said it sounded very nice. And she hoped I was eating well, and she asked about the weather. It was the most surreal 12-minute conversation of my life. She talked about a trip she and my father were planning to Portugal. She mentioned that my brother's wife was expecting, which I hadn't known, and I said congratulations genuinely, because I meant it, because the baby had nothing to do with any of this. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the 2.5 years. She spoke as if things between us were merely a little distant, the way families sometimes get, nothing particular to explain. Before she hung up, she said, "Your father would like to hear from you." I said, "He has my number." She said, "He's not good at that kind of thing. You know Souses." And I said, "I know exactly how he is, Mom. That's the whole point." She was quiet for a second, and then she said goodbye and that was it. I don't know if she understood what I meant. I think maybe she did. And that was harder for her than not understanding. Some people have lived inside a certain version of things for so long that the truth about it can only be glimpsed sideways, briefly, and then they have to look away again. I think my mother looked away. That's her choice to make. It's not mine to manage. My grandmother visited the studio in November. She took the train from Toronto by herself, the way she's done everything by herself, for the last 15 years since my grandfather died. She was of her good coat, and she brought me a jar of the preserved lemon she makes every fall. And she sat at the kitchen counter while I made lunch, and she asked me questions about the work. Real questions, the kind that assumed I knew what I was talking about. When we were eating, she looked around the space, the skylights, the brick, the shelves of reference books, the photographs developing on the proof sheet I'd pinned to the wall, and she said, "This is what you were supposed to be doing." "I think so," I said. "Your father is going to figure that out eventually," she said. "Or he won't. Either way, you won't have wasted any time waiting." I thought about that for a long time after she left. She's right, of course. There's something I've had to learn. Slowly. In fits and starts. In the space between the life I was supposed to have and the one I'm actually building. About what you do. When the people who were supposed to believe in you first simply don't. You grieve it. I let yourself understand that it was a real loss exum. Not just a dramatic exit. And then you find a way to put all that energy somewhere that belongs to you. My art teacher in high school. This was a woman I had for 2 years, who genuinely changed the way I thought about making things. She used to say that the best work comes out of the place where something hurt. Not because suffering is romantic or necessary, but because when something costs you something, you pay attention differently. You see things differently. You stop making work that's trying to please someone, and start making work that's trying to tell the truth. I don't know if she was right about everything, but I think about her when I'm testing a recipe for the 6th time and I can't figure out what's missing, and then I go back to the actual memory. A fish stew my grandmother made when I was 9, the way the kitchen smelled on that specific afternoon, and I find it. The real thing. Not the approximation. That's what I do now. I find the real thing. The studio has been running for 8 months. We do recipe development for 3 food brands, a quarterly supper series that seats 16 people and has a wait list, and I've been working on a book proposal with an agent in Toronto who found me through the same profile piece my brother saw. I have a part-time assistant, a woman named, she'll kill me if I use her actual name. Someone who is 23 and terrifyingly competent and asks better questions than most people twice her age. I pay my taxes. I have an accountant. I think about the future in increments that feel real to me. Next season's supper series, next year's book timeline. The renovation to the back garden I want to do in the spring. My grandmother calls every Sunday. My brother texted when his baby was born. A girl, healthy, everyone doing well, and I sent a gift and I meant it sincerely. We are in a tentative, careful place, he and I, which is more than we were 2 years ago. I think we're both figuring out what kind of siblings we want to be now that we're not performing our roles at the family table. My father has not called. I don't know if he will. I have stopped organizing my life around that question. There is a version of this story where he calls and we have a hard, honest conversation, and something between us gets repaired. And I genuinely don't know how that would go, but I think I could survive it either way. There is another version, where he doesn't. Where he goes the rest of his life being a person who chose a narrative over his daughter and can't find the door back. I think about what my grandmother said. Either way, I won't have wasted any time waiting. My kitchen smells like preserved lemon and browning butter. The light through the skylights in the afternoon is the specific pale gold of an Ottawa autumn. And it lands on the counter exactly the way I hoped it would when I first walked through this building. Tomorrow I have a development session for a client, and in the evening I'm testing a potato gratin that's been bothering me for 2 weeks. Too much cream, not enough structure, something off about the layering. I'll figure it out. I usually do, if I give it enough time. I walked out of my parents' house in March with 2 bags and a set of skills I'd spent years not being allowed to take seriously. I walked into a building that belongs to me, in a city where nobody knows my father's name before they know mine. That's enough. For now, that is completely enough.